Hey everybody, this is Matthew Seville with SLRLounge.com and another weekly edit for you all. Now this week we have this beautiful sunrise here. It's a foggy morning. This is in Irvine, the suburban landscape. And basically we're going to talk about something that I had to teach myself right around the time I was getting into Photoshop and everything. And that is, don't over edit your photos. And I think you all can relate to this if you've been, editing and working in Photoshop for a year or two or three. When we first start out, we tend to really go to town on our photos. We get this notion in our heads that if a photo doesn't get like an hour or two's worth of editing, then it's not perfectly done. It's not finished. When, of course, in reality, sometimes less is absolutely more. So let's open up this image. I'm browsing my archives here. This is from back in the day, 2000 something. And I'm just using Adobe Bridge CS6 to go through some archives. I'm sure some of you recognize some of these photos from other weekly edits and tutorials. Anyways, I'm going to double click on this DNG RAW file here and open it up in the Camera Raw interface. And as you can tell, I've got a little bit of blown out highlights, so I'm going to hit O to hide my highlight warning. First, of course, I do see a few specks. I'm going to right click and click to 100% here and hit H to get my hand tool so I can scroll around a little bit. I see a dust speck right here. Maybe there's a little something right here. My monitor's a little dirty, so here's a trick for you all. If you're looking for specks of dust and you have, a speck of dust on your actual computer display, grab and move your image around a little bit, and you can see there's a speck here, a speck here, a speck here. And if I were holding still, these kind of specks look a little bit like a bit of dust on your computer screen. So that's what I do if I have a slightly dirty computer screen or something. I just scroll around a little bit. Of course, you could clean your display, and I usually do that once a week, but I do a lot of talking in front of my computer, and it's just something that happens. Okay, anyways, I'm gonna hit B to get my brush here for healing. Well, officially it's called the spot removal brush, but I use the heal type instead of clone, so I call it the healing brush too sometimes. Anyways, let's click on this dust speck and then just drag so it goes like that. I'm going to click on this dust speck, I'm going to click on that dust speck. I'm going to hold down the space bar, look for any other dust specks around here. I don't see anything too significant. These are ducks, so I'm going to leave them in the image. And then there's this big old dust speck right here from sensor dust. I'm going to click and drag to make my spot removal a little bit bigger there and get rid of that. And then this one, I can't tell if that's a cloud or not, but if I'm sure if I were to hang it in a gallery, somebody would be like, dude, you've got a speck of sensor dust. And I'd be like, no, that's a cloud. So instead of dealing with that, I'm just going to eliminate it right now. And let's just call it good and move along. Okay, look over here. There's nothing else there. And I think we're good. I'm going to hit H again to get back to my hand tool. Now, another order of business, sort of just housekeeping that I want to go over. And that is the whole fact that I'm blowing out this highlight. I just hit O again to reveal that blown highlight. And this is something that you just want to keep in mind throughout any edit that you're doing where you're, concerned about highlights clipping or blowing out. And that is the fact that Bridge gives you both sRGB and other RGB color spaces to work with. And right now you can see I'm in sRGB, and that's why this highlight is blowing. If I click on these workflow options down here and go to Adobe RGB, or ProPhoto RGB is the one that Lightroom uses, so we're most used to that usually. If I click OK, watch, it goes away almost completely, and now the only blown highlight is actually just the sun itself. So now the reason that I do this is just to kind of check up on the image and make sure that even if I go back to sRGB, because I want my workflow to be the most similar to whatever I'm going to be doing on, web presentation mostly for all of these images, I want to edit in that sRGB color space, but I just want to check and see and make sure that my ProPhoto color space has enough to handle it if I want to do an actual print, hang it in a gallery. I might take it to my local photo lab where they do accept Adobe RGB color spaces or something. Anyway, so I'm going to hit O again and hide those blown highlights. The other thing is, since this is an old camera and it was 5.8 megapixels, this was on a 6 megapixel Nikon D70. So what I want to do is I want to enlarge this image. I want to upscale it, and here you can see the third option, crop size. I'm going to upscale it to 10.8 megapixels. I really like being able to do this within Adobe Bridge and Camera Raw because it gives you a better representation of how to sharpen your raw images as you upscale them, compared to, say, doing it later in Photoshop or something like that. So let's right click and go to 100% here. I'm going to hit H to get my hand tool and scroll around a little bit. You can see the detail obviously isn't the same as if I had a 10 megapixel camera, but it's still really good. So I'm going to go over here to my detail panel. Let's turn the sharpening up. Let's see, somewhere around 70, 80. This looks good. And then let's turn the noise reduction up as well, maybe 20 to 30 or so, because I'm digging into the shadows here. And I like the way this looks, so I'm going to right click again and click Fit to View, or I could just double click on my hand tool here, and that'll take me back to Fit to View. And so here we go. Let's edit this image, but let's try to not over edit the image. Of course, I want to start by going to our SLR Lounge Preset System here, which is on the Presets tab. And as you can see, I've got some default reset import type presets. I've got soft portrait presets that are great for soft portraits, obviously, as the name implies. And then I've got vivid landscape presets. I've got stylized color presets. These are all in the My Mixology section. And these presets are available for both Adobe Camera Raw Bridge CS6 and Adobe Lightroom, both versions 4 and now the version 5.0 beta, Lightroom 5 beta, if you guys have downloaded that and played around with it a little bit. All of our presets are available for both of those programs, all of those programs. So all right, let's play around with this image. Oftentimes I go straight to the HDR type presets because I've got some deep shadows here, and as we talked about, I do have a little bit of blown highlights, but the bottom line is that this could be an HDR type image. So maybe I'm just going to click right to my Vivid Landscape HDR Max preset. And to be honest, it just doesn't work for me. So let's go over to the basic develop panel here and let's have a look at what it is doing. Basically, this preset is maxing out all of these settings. It's reducing the highlights and whites all the way to try and preserve these highlights. And it's boosting the contrast, shadows, and blacks all the way up to try and compensate for that, bring out the shadow detail, and basically just overall, for this particular image, it is overcooked, you would say. So let's go back to our presets, and instead of max, let's try strong. It's still a little bit over the top. I'm going to try HDR light, and it looks nice right about here. But just for fun, just to see what the difference is, let's go to the basic standard color for Vivid Landscape mixologies here. And when I click on it, you can see it's leaving these shadows nice and dark and moody. It's not going too crazy on these highlights. And honestly, I actually really like what this is doing. So instead of going all the way over the top crazy and going, HDR max or something, I want to be somewhere in between this standard color Vivid Landscape and maybe this HDR light Vivid Landscape. But the HDR light tends to do a little bit too much to my highlights and kind of overall crunchiness. So I'm going to start with the standard color Vivid Landscape, and then from there I'm going to go to the basic panel and do just maybe one or two minor tweaks. Again, I'm going to try and keep it simple. I don't want to over edit this image and make it look weird. So maybe all I want to do is get into these shadows a tiny bit. I'm just going to click and drag my shadows up. I could go about this far, that's too far. Up here in the 80, 90, 100 range. Maybe I want somewhere 50, 60, 70. That looks good to me. I'm also thinking that I do want to brighten my exposure overall. And so let's grab the exposure and just bring it up. Maybe half a stop is too bright. Maybe more like quarter of a stop or a third of a stop. Maybe 0.25, that looks good. So anyways, folks, there you have it. That is about it. Let's just have a look at this image for a second. And I want to compare this edited version with, I'm going to click and go to Camera Raw defaults really quick, just so that we can see how little we actually did to this image. All I'm doing is kind of giving it a little bit of clarity and contrast. So overall, you can see, I'm going to hit Control Z and look at it for a second, and then I'm going to hit Control Z again. Honestly, I feel like I might have even still over edited this image. Maybe if anything, I'll dial the clarity down a little bit because this is a foggy, soft, warm morning. And maybe I'll also dial the contrast down just a tiny bit, again, to keep this image nice and muted. So now let's compare this with the Camera Raw defaults. Okay, now I'm really happy with this edit compared to this original. And that's about it. That is my lesson for you all today. Especially when you're in a situation where you have a beautiful opportunity. I got really lucky with this beautiful foggy sunrise. And so the more I have a beautiful scene and pretty colors, the more I want to let those things speak for themselves and not over edit my images. Of course, it may not always be the case. You might need to, do strong contrast manipulation and burning and dodging if the scene just doesn't really lend itself to standing on its own 2 feet, as they say, or, if it just needs a little bit of burning and dodging, then that's fine. But my lesson for you today is look for those moments, those scenes, and those opportunities where the original image that you capture doesn't need much editing at all. So, all right, folks, let's wrap up here. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next tutorial video. Take care.